Hello and welcome back to Geek and Speak, the Geek and Seek podcast. Today we are talking about win cons. I know you Commander players like to sit there and draw your cards and ramp and just do fun things, but eventually someone has to win the game, and here are some cards that on their own, without playing any kind of specific combo, might just win you the game here and there. So that is what we are talking about today. We're going to go through all the 5 colors, highlight some of the popular ones, and give our takes on them. So join with me today is Preston. Preston, how's it going, man?
Going pretty good. It's always fun to be able to win a game of Magic in a way, people aren't expecting.
Heck yeah. And then Jason, how's it going, man? I see you repping your team.
Yeah, you could say it's going pretty good. As you can see, we did some good stuff today. We probably should have won by more, and it shouldn't have been as close as it was during the fourth quarter, but you know what? That's football stuff. Let's get to the magic.
Yeah, Jason, I thought you had just had like a fun get-up, but I didn't realize that your chain also had a giant M on the end, and that kind of makes it even crazier. But hi, I'm your host, Morgan. I'm also doing good. Guys, I just played in my first real paper standard tournament since like 2018. I got top 8. Look at this Shark Typhoon. Look at it. Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
Pretty sick Shark Typhoon.
Yeah, made top 8. It was
We're
a good time.
very proud of you, Pookie.
I love your Sharknado.
Yeah. It was a good time. I've had more fun playing paper standard the last 3 weeks than I've had playing Magic in like a long time. So it was good. It was fun to get out there, meet some new people, and play with and against some cool decks. So if you would like to support the show in any way, shape, or form, you can do all the normal YouTube algorithm stuff. That being liking this video, leaving comments, checking out our other content, all that good Jimmy Jazz. Being subscribed if you're not already subscribed. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can hop on patreon.com/geekandseek YouTube. There's a cool Patreon-only episode of our Commander gameplay series coming out pretty soon. And if you'd also like to keep the conversation going outside of the comments section, you can also always hop in our Discord. You can find a link to that and our Patreon and several other things in the description of all of our videos. Comment of the week. This is from Punky Pinko 2965. This is in response to last week's podcast where we did a tier list of mana rocks. This is quoting Preston. I would give this an A, but I'll give it a B because I am not interested in playing Grixis. What? That makes no sense. And Jason and I agree.
100%. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It made sense with how I thought we were doing the episode.
Okay. So the card in question is Relic of Sauron. A Relic of Sauron is a Grixis 4-mana mana rock that it also can like do some looting. It fixes your mana really well if you're in Grixis. And Jason or I were like, well, you put this in all Grixis decks, right? But then Preston said that like, well, I don't want to play Grixis, so I don't want to play this. But did you have any other defense of it for your rating?
I don't know. I feel like I defended it. I thought we were basing it in part with how if we would play the cards, or if we do play the card, then I just didn't have a deck for the card.
That's fair, I suppose. But we'll be a little more clear on our ranking going forward. We'll be back next week with another tier list. Real quick on news, we're not going to get into specifics of cards today, but as of today, the recording of this episode, so a few days after before you guys are seeing it, Duskmorn previews have already started because we're in perpetual hype for the next set. But if you are excited about Duskmorn, let us know in the comments what some of your favorite cards are already that are being previewed, any cool new mechanics you are excited about. We will be doing at least a couple episodes later on in the podcast for Duskmorn cards, so if you want to hear our takes on that, make sure you subscribe so you see those episodes when they come out in a few weeks. All right, so heading into the main topic, we have win cons. A win condition, it's a card that you need to win the game, obviously, and often is like, if you already have a little bit of a setup, you play this one card, you probably just win the game. This is not going to be a combo. This is not going to be, oh, I have like infinite mana. This isn't going to be like, oh, whatever. Like, this is, I play this card, if it's synergizing well or whatever, I have the right setup, I probably cast this, I probably win the game. So that's most of these cards. So we're gonna go buy them in Wooburg order and give our takes on whether we like these cards, whether we think they're a good power level, what decks we would play them in, all that good stuff. To get my voice a rest, Preston, do you want to go ahead and read off this first card?
Sure. First up, we have Moonshaker Cavalry. For 5 and 3 white, it's a 6/6 creature spirit knight with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain flying and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So obviously, you throw this down on a play on the ground. Sorry, I had a little bit of a stroke there. So you play this when you have a bunch of creatures out, you give them all flying to get over everybody's heads. If you have like 7+ creatures out, they're all going to get huge. There's a pretty good chance you're going to win right there.
So this is something that we see a little bit in white are these overrun effects, but they're more something we see in green. How do you guys think that this compares to... Like, I think this is the best white one, but how do you think it compares to, like, say, like Craterhoof Behemoth? Like, a lot of people call this the white Craterhoof. Do you think that the flying is better? Do you think that it's an appropriate buff? What do you guys think about this card as far as, like, if I'm playing a creature deck, this is going to, like, do we feel like this is going to do the job just as well as Craterhoof?
The one thing that you have to take into account is this is not going to inherently have haste like Craterhoof will. One of the biggest parts of Craterhoof Behemoth is the fact that he's also going to get the buff and he can swing right away. So, and usually when you play Craterhoof, you play a bunch of really small creatures, then you play Craterhoof, and then it makes them all really big. Craterhoof's really big, but Craterhoof is often the biggest creature that you have. So that is one of the downsides, is that you're not able to swing out with what's likely going to be the biggest creature on your board, but you're giving all of your other creatures that... like evasion, Craterhoof gives trample. This gives flying. Flying in most cases is going to be better than trample. At least that's what I would assume. I don't know that much. Like, if you're playing these types of overrun effects, you've likely just made 100 1/1 spirits, or at least 20 1/1 spirits, and maybe they already have flying, but I don't think it's as good, but I think it's still really... It's like Craterhoof and then this.
So I think it depends on the kind of deck, right? Because, like, Craterhoof is... I think Trample is usually better than Flying. Because, like, what if your opponents have flyers or creatures with reach? Then they're going to be able to chump block, Whereas Trample, they have to have a lot of bodies in order to do chump blocking. So I think the Trample is usually better than Flying. But also, because you're playing green, it's easier to ramp into your 8 mana creature. Whereas in Moonshaker Cavalry's defense, like, it's white. So depending on what you have going on in the rest of your deck, you might not be ramping into this. You might not be able to plop this down all that quickly. But white does have a lot of go wide synergies. You do have, like, token decks that you can be playing. And then you also have a lot of just small dirtily creatures that they come in, they do their thing, and then now they're just here for fodder. So this kind of turns them into beaters at the end of the game. If you guys are playing a Selesnya deck, green-white, do you, and it's like it's specifically like a go-wide creature deck, do you play just Craterhoof, or do you also play Moonshaker Cavalry?
I think you play both. Why wouldn't you play both?
I think you definitely play both. And I think this one is weaker than Craterhoof as a one-of, but the thing that might make this a little better is because you're playing white, you can play all those exile effects that return the creature back. That's where I think this has this has all the flicker effects. I think that's what maybe makes this arguably better than Craterhoof, because you're going to have to spend more time getting that mana ready than you do in a green deck, but you probably have a bigger board with your white token deck than your green token deck a lot of the times. So if you can play this and then flash it or flicker it once or twice, that's going to be pretty big.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that part.
I guess I would agree to, like, this. Moonshaker Cavalry is better in mono white decks and maybe 2-colored decks that have white in it, but I think Craterhoof is just going to slot into a lot more decks.
All right, so our next white win con, if Jason, you want to take this one.
Yeah, so this is the classic Approach of the Second Sun. So it's a sorcery for 6 and a white, and it says if Approach of the Second Sun was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, you gain 7 life. This card is... I don't see this as a win con most of the time, because one of the things that you mentioned, Morgan, at the beginning of this episode was often you can win the game out of nowhere. You can't really win the game out of nowhere with Approach of the Second Sun unless you already have some other type of gosh, I can't even think. Unless you have some other type of setup that's enabling you to either search for it or pull it from, the 6 cards that are on top of it in your library.
Yeah, just already have a draw engine, you get there faster.
Yeah. So not my favorite win con, but it's definitely a fun one when you can get it to go off.
Dude, it was so annoying when this was there were actual Approach of the Second Sun control decks in Standard back when this was Standard legal. And it's annoying because it's not like in Commander where it's just singleton and they have the one of and where it is in the deck because they just put it back. It's like, well, no, they could run a 4 of this in Standard. So, yeah, there is one 7 down, but there might be one before then, or there might be another one already in their hand. And it was so hard to play around. Preston, have you ever played Approach of the Second Sun?
I don't really play it much anymore because it can kind of make some people a little salty and, can be played around. 7 mana, that's a lot. And, you have to have a draw engine to really make it work. But I'm always going to love this card. This was pretty close to when I started playing Magic. This was one of the first alternate win cons I ever came across, if not the first. So I'm always going to have a soft spot in my heart for it. It's not the best. It's not my favorite overall, but I'm always going to love it quite a bit.
I don't really understand how anyone can be salty about this. I mean, it's not like you didn't see
fair.
it. It's not like you didn't see it coming. Like, anybody gets salty about Approach to the Second Sun, then I feel like that you just got some stuff you need to work on, homie.
Some people just don't like the phrase "win the game."
Yeah, some people are like, I just want to throw my creatures at you, right? Like they just want to do it the old school way.
The game's got to end, and if you don't have the ability to do it with a big board like that, you at least better have some cards that'll put you in a position to win the game, or just say you win the game. The one thing I will say that Approach to the Second Sun has going for it is it doesn't even have to resolve the second time. You just have to cast it. Like, it doesn't matter if anybody counters it. It just doesn't matter. As soon as you cast it that second time, you win.
Yeah. Okay, next up, we have Akroma's Will, which is for 3 and a white, an instant that says choose one, but if you control your commander, you can choose both instead. Oh, man, there's a lot of keywords. Bullet point number 1, creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. Bullet point number 2, creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from each color until end of turn. I feel like a lot of the time, one of these modes is often enough to win. So mode number 2 is more of a protective piece. Like if it's like, hey, I'm really far behind in life, I need to just give my creatures lifelink so I can, get stabilized a little bit, then that's fine. Or you can use that second mode to give your creatures indestructible. It is an instant, so if someone's going to board wipe you, play this. But a lot of the times, if you just have a handful of creatures on the board, you have your commander, you're able to choose both modes. It doesn't, you really don't even need that big of a board. Like, there's so much. Flying, vigilance, double strike, indestructible, protection from all colors, lifelink. That will just end the game most of the time. Jason has killed people with Akroma's Will more times than I thought possible. This card's insane.
Yeah, the thing that makes this card so strong is the first group of words is win the game, and the second group of words is survive. But when you actually play the card, both modes do both things very well. because the first one is giving your creatures vigilance. So even if you swing and don't manage to win right there, you still have a board to keep yourself safe. And the second one, if you play that in response to a board wipe, you still have all your stuff. Everyone else just lost all their creatures. You could just win the game when it's your time to, it's your turn to swing again. So like this card is just so strong.
This card is one of my favorite ways to win games. In Tholis, it's probably the way that I win the game the most. But I mean, how can you really hate this card? It's just so good.
Well, this is the definition of a card that wins out of nowhere too. Like, because it's also an instant and it's only 4 mana, it's not that hard. Like by the mid to late game to have 4 mana, you can already declare attacks, declare blocks before damage, flash this in, and people are dead without knowing that they were dead.
Yeah. And the thing about it too is there is a lot of utility in it. Where you can use it just as a hold this back and save my stuff, and then on the next turn, everybody, is shields down, and I can just take everybody out.
Yeah. Preston, I think you added this next one to the list. Do you want to talk about this next one?
Yeah. All right, so next up we have Felidar Sovereign for 4 and 2 white. It's a 4/6 creature, cat beast, with vigilance and lifelink. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 more life, you win the game. Classic life gain win con. We all know I'm the life gain guy. It's my favorite thing to do in a game of Magic besides kill myself, ironically enough. So getting my life total up super high and then just being rewarded for it with little to no extra work is just fantastic.
This and Approach to the Second Sun are the only 2 win cons in Steven's Quain deck, and that's really sad, but it's kind of funny. Or I think he also has Force Fruition, so he can like mill people out by making them draw too many cards. Those are Steven's only win cons in his Quain deck. But yeah, I think because you start with 40 life, this is a card that was not templated for Commander because this was before Commander was popular. So it's 40 or more life in Constructed, it's like, oh, that's going to take some work. I'm going to actually have to play a life gain deck. Helps that has lifelink. But in Commander, when you start with 40, you just have like a Soul Warden on the battlefield, play this, and then just hope it doesn't die, and poof, you win the game. So I feel like it's a fair card, though. I mean, it's 6 mana. All people really have to do is, it doesn't have protection, right? You can kill it with any removal. Yeah, if you're really that worried about, just attack that person and get their life total low enough. So it's a fair card, but it is kind of funny that it's templated in a way that in Commander it does just sometimes win out of nowhere.
Yeah, the decks that really want to play this card are the blue-white life gain decks, where they use this as a win con, because blue has all the cards where you get extra beginning phases. So you could play this card and then just go to your next beginning phase, and that's your upkeep, so you're triggering it the turn that you played it. I think that's the best spot for this card to go, is in those decks.
That's disgusting.
Or decks where you can play creatures with flash.
If Videlkin Orrery is like a main card that you run in a deck that you have or something like that. But yeah, it's super fair outside of those situations, because you're playing it and then you're just like, please let me just get to another upkeep. And if it's a 1v1 game, if you've gotten everybody else out and it's just you and another player, sometimes that can be a lot easier, easier thing to accomplish. But if you play this when you have 3 other players at the table, it's probably not going to last until your next upkeep, or your life total is not going to be at 40 until your next upkeep, unless you've just gained 100 life and nobody can do anything about it.
Yeah. There's a reason most versions of this are $2. It's a fun win con in my opinion, and it can be kind of strong, but it's not oppressive or anything. You absolutely can work around it.
All right, Jason, do you want to walk us through our last white win con we have on our list?
Yeah, so this is Halo Fountain. It's an artifact for 2 and a white, and it has 3 tap abilities. The first one is you pay a white and tap it to untap. You pay a white, you tap it, and you untap a tapped creature that you control. And you create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. The second tap ability is you pay 2 white, tap it, and untap 2 target creatures you control, and you draw a card. And then the third one is you pay 5 white, tap it, and untap 15 creatures you control, and you win the game. With the right setup, this is absolutely a win out of nowhere card because it doesn't enter tapped. It only costs 3 mana to play. If you're you're likely gonna have this in a deck that either cares about artifacts, or this is something that you're gonna tutor up because it's green and white citizens, so you could be playing this in a Selesnya deck. So and you're in white, so you're gonna have the certain artifact tutors that you need. But this is definitely a card that you can play for value at any point in the game, but holding it in your hand or drawing it towards the end of games and using it to finish a game, this is a really strong card, especially at 3 mana, because you can cascade into this pretty freaking easily too. There's just a lot of good things about this card because it's 3 mana.
So, Preston, I know that you've championed for this card ever since it came out. Have you ever got the win with it? How easy is it to actually get to 15 creatures, even in the token decks?
I think I've maybe won with this once. I think. I know I have for sure won with it at least once. I might have gotten a couple times, but yeah. You have to pay 3 for it, and you have to pay 5 white. Specifically white, not just 5 mana in general, 5 white to do that third ability, which it's a lot. That's a lot to have to spend. And then you have to have those 15 tapped creatures. If it was tapping 15 untapped creatures, oh my god, this would be a $70 card. But the fact that you have to have those creatures already tapped, it's a strong card, but it's, again, a pretty fair win con, all things considered. If you have let the white player pay 8 mana and have 15 currently tapped creatures, I think they deserve that win. You should have done more to stop that.
To me, any card that you spend 8 mana or more on, that's a card that I feel should win you the game most of the time.
Yeah, we'll talk about a few other cards on this list that are 8 mana. I mean, honestly, the first card we talked about, Moonshaker Cavalry, was kind of in that ballpark of there's several cards on our list that's 8 mana, I win the game. If the setup's here, then I survived to 8 mana. I still have a board. I should have the win.
And with Halo Fountain, you really play this during your second main phase. You don't play this first main phase and then attack. You attack when you don't have it on the battlefield. If you have a bunch of small creatures, if you got a bunch of 1/1 spirits or something, it's somebody's, I'll take 5 from 5 creatures. That's fine. I don't care. And they don't kill any of your stuff. You play the second main phase, tap that 5 mana, boom, you win the game.
Well, you can technically do it first main phase because you can just, go to attack and then before they declare blockers, untap them.
Yeah, but if you have this on the battlefield before you go to combat, your opponents are going to see it and they're going to know what you're trying to do. So if you just do it second main phase, then your opponents probably don't see it coming. And like I said, if you have a bunch of really small creatures, they're probably going to be willing to let small amounts of damage get through.
How do we think this card is as just a value piece for the first and second ability? Because I feel white token producers and white card draw is good enough that the first 2 abilities aren't good enough. Am I wrong, or?
Okay, think of it this way. I think that the second ability is definitely the second strongest ability on this card, because it's like pseudo giving your creatures giving 2 creatures vigilance and drawing you a card. And untapping creatures, that can enable a lot of really nasty combos. So I think that paying 2 white to untap 2 creatures and draw a card, I would gladly pay 2 white for that any day of the week.
All right, heading into blue. First one is actually a category of cards, and this is Oops, No Cards. The classic one is Laboratory Maniac. This is for 2 and a blue, human wizard. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Obviously, you would normally lose in that situation. But there's a few other cards that do this. There's also Thassa's Oracle, which is when it enters, you scry, equal to your devotion to blue. And then if that's X is greater than the number of cards in your library, you win the game. It's a popular finisher in CEDH. And then there's also Jace, Wielder of Mystery, which basically says the same thing as Labman. So the obvious thing here is that you combo with them, right? You play something that mills you or exiles your library. Like I said, that's a popular win con in CEDH. But there are decks that you can just fairly play these. Like I have Jace Wielder of Mysteries in my Muldrotha deck just because, but at the late game, I can just mill myself out. I don't have any combo in there. I don't have any card that says mill my whole graveyard or mill my whole deck. I don't have anything that's exiling my whole deck. I just by the mid to late game, I can have milled myself so much that I can fairly win with Jace Wielder of Mysteries. What do you guys think about these cards? Do you enjoy them? Do you hate them? What do you think?
So I think that if you play these fairly, they're all right, because getting your library to a point where there's no cards in it, unless you're doing some sort of combo, that's going to take a while. So, in that situation, it's nice to have these cards, in games that have lasted a couple hours and they just need to end, where you can, actually do that and just win the game. But it's when you start doing like the demonic consultation, Thassa's Oracle type stuff. Those are feel bad wins. Unless you're playing in CEDH. If you're playing in CEDH, then it should be expected. You're playing CEDH. But in a casual game, it's just a feel bad win. It's just like, man, I really feel like you didn't have to do a whole lot of anything for that win, and it doesn't really feel fair. So that I'm not a fan of when they're played like that. But if you play them fairly, then yeah, they're fine.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I do the same thing Morgan does, where I have some decks where I will just draw 80 cards in a game a lot of the time. So these are just good potential win cons if I think there's a real chance I'm going to run out of a library in a lot of my games. So I think they're fun if you're playing them. I think some of those decks that do that kind of thing can be kind of annoying because they don't have a way to finish the game sometimes. So to have these in there as a thing that it wins the game, but they're very interactable. Jace is a planeswalker. He only has 4 loyalty. He's only got a +1. You're probably never going to do the ultimate because you want to keep him alive, but it's pretty easy to hit him. Lab Maniac's only a 2/2 for 3, so Thassa's is a 1/3, so they're all easy to deal with if they're being played fairly. So
I'm also okay if you're like playing Thassa's Oracle in like a Devotion to Blue deck or a just a Merfolk tribal deck, because then it's like I'm mostly just scrying, and if I sometimes accidentally win the game with it, then that happens. But like that's better than comboing off with it, right? Like it's just here for value, and then sometimes it will win you the game.
if you get your devotion to 30,
Yeah, you
that's
deserve
pretty
the win.
baller.
That means that you went several turns without a board wipe. Yeah.
And what makes Thassa's Oracle better than Jason Lab Maniac is that it triggers when it enters. So like, Jason Lab Maniac, you play them, but then you also have to do something else to either draw a card and win the game right there, or wait until you get to your next turn so you can draw a card and hope that nobody does anything to that stuff. Thassa's Oracle is just going to trigger when it enters, which is a really big upside for it.
Yeah. We got a couple other blue cards. Preston, you want to read this next one?
All right, next up we have Omniscience for 7 and 3 blue. It's an enchantment. You may cast spells from your hand without playing their mana cost. This is one of the most commander win cons ever printed. Emptying out your hand, you're playing blue, so some of those cards you're playing are card draw spells. You go through your entire deck in one turn. Hopefully you have something in there to win, maybe, a Thassa's or something. But yeah, this is one of the strongest ones. Not my personal cup of tea usually, but I wouldn't be mad about seeing it in a lot of games.
I used to have a St. Augustine deck. Is that what he was called? It was Azorius Control, and this was my win con in the deck. Because if I could just get to the point where I could get to this 10 mana, drop Omniscience, I'm unstoppable, baby. Because the hard part about playing Control and Commander is you get to the point where I can only counter 1 or 2 things a turn, because those are the cards I have in my hand. I only have so much mana I can leave up. But if I get to 10 mana, then I can cast all the counter spells I want. So if I got Omniscience down, I was almost guaranteed to win the game, unless someone like, okay, untap, destroy the Omniscience, then maybe that they could get away with it. But if I see an Omniscience on the table, I assume I've lost.
Yeah, and what's interesting about my experience with this card is when I really first started to get into Commander pretty heavily, I pulled this card in the, when was it reprinted? 2020? Was it reprinted in that or 2019?
Core set 19, yeah.
So I pulled it out of a Core 19 set, and I was like just barely into Commander. And I was like, this card seems really, really powerful. And I like showed somebody that I was at my local game store, and somebody that was there, I was like, hey, this seems really, really good. Like, am I understanding this right? And they were like, yeah, that card's really powerful. And even then, in that early stage of my Magic life, I was in a game, I was playing my Tatiova deck, and I had Omniscience in the deck at the time, and I put it onto the battlefield, and my opponent scooped. I did not have the win in my hand. I was just like, all right, now I can play everything for free. Let me just play some stuff and have some fun. My opponent assumed that I won, so he scooped, and I was just thrown. I was like, okay, yeah, I win the game. Cool, sweet.
Yeah. It's kind of a messed up card. I think it's funny. So there's a set coming out at the end of the year, I think in November, called Foundations. And it's a set that is supposed to be for the next 5 years minimum, maybe longer, cards that are legal and standard, and Omniscience is getting reprinted into Foundations. Meaning that at least for starting in November, at least for the next 5 years, maybe forever, Omniscience is going to be standard legal. And that's hilarious.
That's amazing.
If someone can break it, I think it's pretty fair in standard. If you fairly get to 10 mana, you got me, man. Like, go for it. Like, you can win. But I think it's funny that for the next few years in standard, we'll have the option to maybe just cheat Omniscience into play, do something degenerate. I think that's kind of funny.
That's pretty funny.
Jason, you want to read this last blue card we got on the list?
Yeah, so this is, it's in the conversation for one of the most powerful win cons in the whole game. This is Expropriate. It's a sorcery for 7 and 2 blue, and it has Council's Dilemma. And it says, starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn after this one. For each money vote, choose a permanent owned by the voter and gain control of it. Exile Expropriate. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm going to tell you this right now. Everybody watching this, if you've never had this card played against you, and the first time you run into this card, it gets played, and you're like, what should I do? Always, 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 always vote money. Never vote time. Do not give somebody an extra turn. Okay, so here's how you play this card if you're playing this card. You play it, and it starts with you, so you vote time. You're going to take an extra turn no matter what. You cannot give your opponent a second extra turn. You will lose the game there. I've seen people play Expropriate and not exactly win just because they get an extra turn. You know, they played it too early, and other people still have answers because they still have resources. Or they go to play it and it gets countered. You know, so you can never, ever, 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 ever give your opponent another extra turn on top of the one they're already going to take. That will lose you the game. I've never seen someone play this card take at least 2 extra turns and then lose.
Well, that's true. Yeah, the correct option is you always just give one of your permanents. And I know that's hard for new players to understand, is because they're like, well, it's my card. I spent my own mana on it. Like, I put it in my deck. I want to play my. But okay. But if you give them the extra turn, they're just going to kill you, and you're not going to get to play your own card. At least if you kill them, it like, yeah, they're going to steal your stuff. But like, if you just kill them, you could get your thing back, right? So you never give them the extra turn. But I remember Preston. I think it was Wesley. Was that the guy's name in high school? Who he introduced us to Commander. After we had been playing Magic for a little bit, he introduced us to Commander. He ran Expropriate in every single one of his blue decks. And man, he could talk anyone into giving him an extra turn. He was so good at he was like, no. See, if you give me the extra turn, I'll use it to attack. I'll use it to take out the person who didn't give me the extra turn. I'm like, yo, that's cold. That's cold. But this card's really messed up.
For 9 mana, the worst thing that's going to happen is you get an extra turn and steal 3 things. That's the worst that it's happening.
Well, the worst I guess would be you get an extra turn and you only steal 1 thing because you only have 1 other opponent. But still. And you can always just give them a land. Yes, the person who played it gets to choose.
I've never put this in a deck because the feel bad is it's such a brutal feel bad card. So I've actually never put it in a deck.
Here's the thing that really makes this card strong too. It gets around Hexproof and Shroud. It doesn't target. It just says you choose a permanent that they control and you gain control of it. So you're not targeting any of their stuff. So you can literally take whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a messed up card. But if you want to win a game, it's an option. If you feel like your blue deck has a hard time winning the game, maybe adding this in there will help you out. All right, we got a few black cards. When I was putting this initial list together, I was surprised how many I was able to find like really good win cons for black. This first one here is Bolas's Citadel. This is for 3 black, so 6 total mana. Legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You're welcome, Jason. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost, and then you can tap it to sacrifice 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. So obviously if you have Sensei's Divining Top or anything like that lets you like reorder cards on top, then you can keep going even farther than you think you could go. If you have any card draw or anything in your hand or fetch lands, then you can keep going farther than you think you could go. I've seen Bolas's Citadel come down and people are able to play like 20 cards. Like it can get pretty insane. And once you've got to that point, so you have to have the life to back it up, right? You have to have the life to back it up. But there are certain decks where that's not a problem. Maybe you have like a Platinum Angel, so having 0 or less life doesn't kill you. Well, you have to have the life. You have to have life in order to pay the life, right? So if you get down to 0, you can't keep using it. But you do eventually get to, or your life gain deck, you just keep gaining it back. But also, that last ability cannot be overlooked because a lot of the time, by the time you have the 3 specific black and you've had a couple good turns with this, people's life totals are low enough that you probably have the board state to sacrifice 10 non-lane permanents, and you're probably killing at least one opponent by having them lose 10 life. This card is really good.
Because it's not non-token permanents either. Like, you can just throw away a bunch of treasures or something.
Yep.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that if you have a board state that is just filled with tokens, you can play this, sacrifice a bunch of those tokens, and deal 10 damage to each opponent. You also, if you have abilities that untap artifacts, and you have a board state big enough, you might be able to activate this twice in a turn and deal 20 damage to each opponent. Pair this up with a card like reflection wounds. You're probably winning that game right then and there.
I think it also works with the new one, the Bloodletter of Aclazotz. I think it also works with that if you're trying to double it.
That type of stuff requires a little bit more setup, but even just sacrificing 10 of your things and killing one player, sometimes it's worth it too, to get a player out of the game. If you can make a deal with people and be like, hey, I'll do this and sacrifice a bunch of stuff and then deal 10 damage and kill that player, but because I'm sacrificing this stuff, just leave me alone for a bit. Or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think this card is really strong, but I've also watched people accidentally lose the game with it enough times to where it's kind of managed to go away from like being, a boogeyman of sorts.
I think it depends on how you build your deck. I think if you're just like I'm just playing with cards I have lying around, it's not that scary. But if you're like, I have Sensei's Divining Top and fetch lands, oh my god. I think I had a nightmare one time that I was playing against Jason and he had this and Sensei's Divining Top at the same time. I think that was like a literal nightmare I had one time. So I think it depends on the deck.
The one thing that I will say about this card too, see, here's the thing though. Like, It is essentially like a rite of passage. If you play this card in a deck, in one game you play it, you are required to kill yourself with it. It's like a rite of passage. If you play this card, you have to do that. It's Bolus's Citadel. You must make a sacrifice in order to use it. So that's
I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying
Oh, no,
people are going to do it because it's fun.
I've definitely killed myself with this card before.
I have too.
All right. So Exsanguinate. X and 2 black for a sorcery. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. Black decks are really good at having a bunch of in-the-moment mana, so, they can play this card for 8+ on that X and just, if not win the game outright, do such a huge swing in life that there's basically no coming back from it. This is a classic black win con. People have loved it for, the entirety of Commander, I think it's been here, because it's a really old card, so it is a good card.
Lest we forget, black is the color that runs Urborg and Cabal coffers, so
Yes,
you're
little known combo Urborg and Cabal coffers.
You're probably able to
I feel
generate.
like we talk about Cabal coffers and Urborg every episode.
You're probably able to generate
black.
a ton of mana for this thing. And even then, you don't necessarily have to use it as a win con. You can use it as a way to just gain a bunch of life really quick. Like if you're in a situation where you're just really far behind your opponents in life total, this can be a way for you to jump ahead instantly of everyone else and then be able to push towards a win. So you can use this as a I win the game right now card, but you can also use this as this is going to allow me to win the game.
If you pay this card for 5, that's 12 life difference in the game right there.
Yeah. I mean, we've even seen it on the show. Like I think it was the deck that Jason built Preston for the Christmas episode. Preston played Exsanguinate where X was equal to 5 or 6. And he just needed it to stabilize. He did not kill anyone with it. He just needed it to stabilize. But you know what? Where X was equal 5 or 6 and he just tapped out, he didn't have coffers or anything. That was enough. It took forever to kill Preston in that game. And it took a good chunk on everyone's life. So even if it's not a win con, it's just if you even just hey, this isn't going my way, I just need to stabilize, I just tap out even if I don't have a crap ton of mana, it's still often good enough. So yeah, good card. All right, Jason, what do we got next?
Next up, we have Tainted Strike. For 1 black, it's an instant that says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Infect until end of turn. So the way that you play this is you have a really big creature, or at least a creature that has 9 power. It's unblocked, and then boom, you play Tainted Strike, making it a 10 power creature that is now going to deal lethal damage to an opponent and kill them. This card is really, really good, especially if you could make copies of it and you're swinging with a couple of different creatures that you're making bigger and giving Infect. But as it by itself, it's not necessarily as powerful as the other win cons that we're going to talk about, because you're only killing one player. And this isn't a repeatable thing, it's an instant, so it's really you want to use this if a certain player at the table needs to go because they're going to win the game, or if it's in that 1v1 situation where it's you and somebody else and you're able to use this to take them out.
Yeah, some of the win cons can feel pretty good against multiple players, but when you're down to the 1v1, don't feel nearly as good. This is the opposite. This is I've got everyone else out. It's me and the other person. Let's finish this. That's and it's only 1 minute, so it's very easy to hold up if they're not expecting it.
It does feel really bad because I've played Tainted Strike and other similar cards in decks before, and it feels bad. Like I have it in my Yargle and Multani deck, just because it's 18 power. If someone goes unblocked, or I have a few ways to give a trample, this will just kill people. But if you kill, if it's still a 4-player game and you kill someone with Tainted Strike, they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs for the next while the rest of the 3 players are playing. That feels really bad. So it is like, it's best to just save it till when you get to the 1v1 and you find the right time to kick it off. But I liked that analysis of it.
I do think that there is some argument for this card to be played in the middle of games, like.
Oh yeah, sometimes if someone's like a problematic arch enemy or something, yeah, for sure. Next up, this is similar to Exsanguinate. This is Torment of Hailfire. X, black sorcery. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So this is just another one of those cards that if X is high enough, you probably just win. I've gotten a couple Torment of Hailfire wins in my day. Because eventually they run out of non-land permanents to sacrifice. They run out of cards to discard. Then they have to take the life. The flip side is that if X isn't high enough, they'll just take the life and not sacrifice or discard anything, and then they'll just retaliate and kill you. But yeah, especially if you got the coffers, or if you're a Golgari deck and you have a ton of mana, this usually wins you the game.
And there's definitely going to be times where you cast this and it doesn't kill everybody at the table, but you've now put everyone else who is alive at such a disadvantage that you're able to win on your next turn, or maybe at most the turn after that. I rarely see this card get played for a high, like, I don't think I see this card get played for 5 mana or more, and that person loses the game. I don't know that I've seen that before. I've seen it where, you play it for like 2 or 3, maybe because, like, you have to play it for whatever. Going on. You have to play it for whatever reason, like somebody's going to play like a Teferi's Puzzle Box and you're going to lose it anyway, so you might as well play it. If it's something like that, then I get playing it for low mana cost, but if you're like a Turgid deck, or like a deck like that, then you could probably get away with X being low just because you'll still get value off of it. Yeah, but if you're playing Turgid, do you have friends to play with?
That's a good question.
I think some new players look at this and they don't think it's too bad because they have 3 different options for like dealing with it. They can either discard, sacrifice, or lose life. But all 3 of those are such devastating effects that it's just so hard to crawl back from, even if it's not an instant win.
Mm-hmm. The one exception is you're pretty safe if you're the token deck. If you're the token deck, just lose all your tokens and you're like, I'm fine. I didn't lose any of my engine pieces. I didn't lose any life. I'm good. I'll make a bunch of more tokens on my next turn. I'll be fine. So if you're the token deck, you're safe.
Or if you're playing one of those decks that's just going to draw 50 cards.
If you T-Pro.
Or if you can be a life gain deck, but even then...
Well, I guess if you're
giving up the stuff you want.
If you T-Pro, you technically have to discard the cards, right? Because your permanents aren't there.
Yeah.
Your life total can't change, but you still have a hand, so you technically have to discard your cards. But like if you're playing like a blue deck where you're drawing, a lot of cards on each turn, you're probably like, I'll pitch 7 cards and I'll draw 10 on my next turn. I'll be fine.
Yeah. There's situations where that would still be worth it. Noteworthy about Torment of Hailfires, there's also the Secret Lair version of it that has the Comic Sans font, where it has the sarcastic alternating between lowercase and uppercase, and the flavor text is, I hope X is 3, ha 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 ha. And I hate that this exists with some of the most badass art I've ever seen.
You might have friends if you play Turgid. If you play this version of Torment of Hailfire, you are not coming back to Magic. You're just not. The store is banning you. Your friends aren't talking to you ever again.
I hate this funny. Secret Lair because the art is so... This whole Secret Lair, the art was awesome, and this is what it is. It's Comic Sans, sarcastic, bad flavor text. It's so cringe. But we got some red cards to talk about. Preston, what's our first red card on our list? This is probably the most iconic one.
There was one more black one, actually.
Oh, never mind. Read that one.
Alright, so finally we have Rise of the Dark Realms for 7 and 2 black. Sorcery, you put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield and under your control. Someone plays a board wipe thinking, alright, we're going to stabilize here. It's good. Everyone just put their 30 creatures away near the graveyard. We're all safe. You play this.
I think this is slightly less consistent than a lot of these other like 9 mana win the game cards, because we have had games where even if some creatures are just kind of dying throughout the game or whatever, it's nothing crazy. Or maybe we somehow go a long time without a board wipe just because people aren't drawing them, or people feel like, it's not that kind of a threat at the table. So like you could get to the point where you have 9 mana, this is sitting in your hand, and it just doesn't feel right to cast it. So I think it's less consistent than a lot of these other high mana value win the game kind of cards out of nowhere. But in certain decks, this is insane. If you're like a deck that's making people sacrifice stuff, making people mill stuff, or if just as the game's progressing, there are a lot of board wipes, this is insane. I have seen Rise of the Dark Realms do a lot of work.
A lot of the times, Rise of the Dark Realms, when it gets played, it's going to do damage, and it is going to win the person that casted the game. But I do agree that it's not going to be as consistent, and one thing that I want to mention in regards to that is more and more people are going to be running Graveyard Hate. Like, you're just going to run into that incidental, like, this enters the battlefield, I'll exile your graveyard. And if you're playing this in a deck where you're playing out of your graveyard, your opponents probably know, that your graveyard at least has to go. But there's a lot more cards that are getting printed that, specifically talk about Graveyard Hate. And I mean, Farewell is this card's worst nightmare. Yeah. But I do think that this is still a really, really powerful effect. And if you're playing in a deck that you want your graveyard to be filled, and maybe you're also filling your opponent's graveyards, this is going to be an all-star, and it's going to win you a lot of games.
Put this in a Dimir Mill deck. Who would ever do that?
Me, I've done that.
All right, we got quite a few more cards to talk about, and we don't want to go too long, so we'll try going a little bit quicker. But Jason, what's our first red card?
So the first red card we are talking about today is Insurrection. It is 5 and 3 red for a sorcery, and it says untap all creatures and gain control of them until end of turn. They gain haste until end of turn. This is an 8 mana card that will win you the game. Like, if you're not playing this card and winning the game afterwards, you're playing the card wrong. It's just, I feel like that it's just one of the most fun ways a red card could say, pay 8 mana, you win the game.
I know a lot of people don't think as highly of this card as they used to, just because it's kind of boring. It's like, I put in all this work, you didn't have to do anything, and now you pay 8 mana and win the game. Like, it's kind of a feel bad, so I know that people don't play it as much as they used to, but it's such a consistent way to win the game. Like, assuming that people have recovered from a board wipe or a board wipe hasn't happened, there's probably enough on board by the time you get to 8 mana that this is just going to win almost every time. Or if not, like I know I played this semi-recently in a game where I killed 2 people and knocked the last person down really low. So like that can happen too, where even if it doesn't win you the game, it sets you up to very likely win the game. But yeah, it gets the job done. Definitely an 8 mana win the game card.
It's 8 mana. It's not as automatic as maybe some of the other win cons we've talked about so far, but I don't know. Red needs it. Red needs all it can get in Commander. I'll never blame
I don't know. I feel like every
player for that.
I don't know. I feel like every time you play this card, it should be an automatic win, right? And if it's not, you're just playing the card wrong.
Well, it's a little bit about timing. It's a little bit about timing, but yeah.
That's kind of what I mean. Like you have to play it at the right time, and if you don't, it doesn't cause you to win the game. But if you're not using this card as a card that wins you the game, then what are you using it for?
Yep.
Well, it's easier for it to not win the game than some of the other ones. Like if you're playing it, it should, but you might just have it sit in your hand for a while, not being able to do anything with it.
Yeah, but when you play it, it's gonna be so consistent, like Morgan said.
So next up, we have Mizzix's Mastery. This is for 3 and a red sorcery. It's a little more specific than a lot of the other ones, but in those decks, it often does the trick. Exile target card that's an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost, and then you exile Mizzix's Mastery. But importantly, it has Overload for 5 red, 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 meaning you may cast this spell for its Overload cost, and if you do, you change target in its text to each, meaning that all of your instants and sorceries are now coming back from your graveyard without paying their mana cost. So if you are a deck that has a lot of instants and sorceries, it's very... So first of all, this will be very complicated to resolve if you are that kind of deck. You'll probably have like 20 plus spells on the stack. You probably have things that are getting triggered. You have to make sure you resolve them in the right order. It's probably going to be a nightmare, but it is very likely it will win you the game. So yeah, a lot more specific than a lot of these other ones, but in that specific deck, it will win games.
This is often going to be in that omniscience category of cards, where as soon as it touches, like as soon as it gets played, people just scoop. Because especially for this card, exactly. If you have a graveyard that's full of instants and sorceries, the players are like, you know what, you win the game. Let's just move on to the next game, or something like that. But this also is in that same category where with Rise of the Dark Realms, where this card hates Farewell. This card,
Yeah, but I think all decks hate Farewell at this point. If I'm being honest, I think Farewell might have been a mistake.
But I mean, exiling the graveyards, it just completely just shuts off what this card is capable of doing. Like, you could spend all game setting up, and now this card does nothing.
Yeah. Anything to add, Preston?
I was going to say, I think maybe the surprisingly most powerful part of this card is the fact that you are casting the copies. You're not just like making a copy that's on the stack. The fact that you are casting them is important because you're playing this in a blue red deck probably. And all of your creatures, the few that you have, are like, when you cast an instant sorcery, do this thing. So not only are you putting 20, 30 instants and sorceries on the stack, you're getting 20 to 30 triggers on the stack as well. And that's, I think, really where the strength of this card comes through even more.
Yeah. So even if it's in a situation where it doesn't literally win you the game, it will often win you games just because people don't want to sit through you resolving it, and they'll scoop. Preston, what do we got next on the list?
All right. Next up, we have Hellkite Tyrant. 4 and 2 red for a 6/5 dragon with flying and trample. When it deals damage or deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Now, this is a very situational card. You really want to play against people who are playing artifacts, but in Commander, most decks are going to have at least a couple. And if you're playing a deck that has a lot, it's very easy to win that. Because it's not saying non-token artifacts, it's any artifacts. So your treasures, your clues, your maps, all of that stuff. Very easy to get this win off in a lot of games of Commander.
Yeah, the two decks I've played it in are Osgir the Reconstructor, which makes clones of all my artifacts, so I get a bunch of artifacts. And then I also had it in my Prosper deck, which was a treasure deck. So yeah, that's a lot. So those are the decks you play it in, because it's nice that you can steal artifacts from your opponents, and maybe that's the little bit you need to tip it over the edge, but you play this specifically in the decks that you think you're probably going to get there naturally with your own deck doing its thing.
Because it's in red, it's going to have access to a lot of haste enablers, so you are going to be in games where you can swing with this the turn that it comes in. The other thing about it, the thing about it with treasures specifically, though, is it's not as good because they can just sacrifice their treasures in response, and you don't get their treasures. But this is really good in Boros decks that also run cards like Blind Obedience. Isn't Blind Obedience one where like artifacts enter tapped? So yeah, even if they're making their treasure tokens are going to enter tapped and they can't use them. So if they're tapped, then they can't sacrifice them to get rid of them.
That's a good point. And that's hilarious. And I hadn't thought about that.
You are also playing red, so multiple combat, so you can hit every person.
True.
Yeah, this card's just really good.
Speaking of weird combats, Jason, what's this next one?
So this is Disrupt Decorum, and it's for 2 and 2 red, a sorcery. It says goad all creatures you don't control. This, I wouldn't say that this is a card that's going to win you the game more than some of these other cards that we're talking about. But this is definitely one where, if somebody just built a huge board state and passed to you, you can now secure that you will in fact not die and make it to one more turn. That's probably the best part about this card, is it basically ensures that you will make it to another turn unless somebody else is doing some sort of like direct damage through cards that they have, like if they're draining you or with a Bolas's Citadel or something like that. But this is also just a fun card. Like, it's one of those win cons that's actually really fun to play. And even if you're not the one casting it, you're like, well, it's about to be some chaos, but we're going to have fun.
I do have this in quite a few of my decks for the fun factor. I used to run it as a board wipe slot in my red decks, because I was like, okay, so I don't know how often I'm going to line it up that I'm like actually clearing the board, but if I'm making my opponents attack each other, they're gonna have to be like attacking and blocking and stuff, so I'll clear out the board a little bit, maybe chip at my opponents a little bit. I think that's wrong. I don't think you run it as a board wipe, but it does just create fun win conditions. I don't know who added this to the list though. So how often do you think this wins you the game? Because the problem is if it comes down to a 1v1, goading doesn't do anything anymore.
Well, I think that it wins you the game.
That's not entirely true. Because you can force them to attack, and then they don't have blockers if you have a better board state.
That's true. And there are cards that say if a goaded creature attacks, like there's the... there's that dragon that says whenever a goaded creature attacks, that it deals with damage to its controller. So, yeah, if you have other payoffs for that, and that's actually a fairly popular card.
But here's the other thing. If you play this while you have multiple people at the table, it's honestly likely going to kill one, maybe two of them, but then the last person or the last two players at the table are full shields down because they had to attack. So now you can swing in and deal the last bit of damage to kill off the other two players.
I could get behind that logic. Yeah, it's definitely a fun card. I have it in, I think, 3 of my decks. It's a fun card. It's baller.
It's a lot of fun.
They can make new creatures, so they might not be fully shields down. Like
True.
the creatures they have come in after this, but it's just a fun win con potential. Like, this one isn't going to annoy people as much as some of the other ones. It's not oppressive. It's a cheap card to buy and to play. It's just a fun win con potential.
Our final red card is Aggravated Assault. This is for 2 and a red. Enchantment. You can pay 3 red to untap all creatures you control. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So, okay, Nehab players, you're kind of floating out in the abyss. We don't know what's happening because communication broke down in the Wizards department on how this new wording works with phases. But traditionally what you do is there are cards that say that you get amount of mana based on like creatures dealing damage or whatnot. And then you can just pump that mana or any other form of repeatable mana into an Aggravated Assault to take infinite combats. However, you don't have to take infinite combats with Aggravated Assault for it to be insane. Because wouldn't you, like, even if you didn't have infinite mana, wouldn't, if you had a decent board state and you had big scary creatures, like you're a dragon deck or a dinosaur deck or a big stompy deck, like if you were playing a deck like that, wouldn't you just be content with, even if you don't have infinite mana, paying 5 mana to get to attack again? I would do it.
5 mana for an extra combat step is great. 10 mana, you get 3 combat steps a turn. You're probably going to win that game. You don't need to do it infinitely.
If you have the proper board set up, 2 extra combats is better than an extra turn.
I can see that.
One extra combat.
If you have the damage on board, I think.
Yeah, exactly. if you get 2 extra combats, so 3 combats total, that is better than taking a full extra turn if you have a board that's going to be able to sustain that type of like attack, I suppose.
All right. As we head into the green, we will kind of skip through some of this because we largely talked about, we had a category of overrun effects. So the main one is Craterhoof Behemoth. We already spent a decent amount of time talking about that when we were comparing it to Moonshaker Cavalry. There is one overrun effect that I still want to talk about today, and that is Triumph of the Hordes. Preston, would you mind reading this card real quick?
Yeah, I can read it. Alright, so for 2 and 2 green, it's a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. This is one of, if not like the first big commander win cons that everyone learns about. It's a very easy way to make your army get through any blockers that they have up. And if you don't beat them in the turn that you hit with, they still probably got a few poison counters. You're playing green, you can proliferate really easily. This card is just so strong for 4 mana.
It's that trample. That trample is what makes it so good. If Tainted Strike had trample on it, that would be one of the best win cons in the game. Like, honestly, the trample, the buff, and the infect all working together, this is, I mean, I don't know. This is just a really, really strong win con in most decks. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like every time you play
Triumph of the
this,
Horde
you're
is-
at least killing 2 players.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes going to be true. I think the reason Triumph of the Hordes is so pushed compared to a lot of these other options for overruns, because there's a ton of cards like this. There's a ton of cards that say +X, trample till end of turn. There's a ton of cards that do that. A ton. We're not going to talk about hardly any of them. We've talked about the couple big ones. The reason this one is so pushed is because the infect. So normally, like, yeah, that opponent has a ton of life. They have way more life than I do. I don't actually have the damage on board to kill them. But because I have infect, I don't have to deal nearly as much damage to them in order to take them out. Infect just makes people salty. And if you want the extra salt, if you want the extra tilt, there is a secret lair version of it that's Fortnite. If you want to play the extra salt, that is an option.
I can just hear it now. Why are you playing a Fortnite card?
I think this is the most mana efficient win con that we're going to talk about today. By a country mile.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, especially because you're in green and you already have the big creatures, so you can probably get there. You can probably kill at least one person. And obviously this is best in decks where you can proliferate. Like if there's like a lot of decks that are specifically proliferate, like if you're like a Traxa or something like that. So like, oh, I didn't quite get there, but like I will get there. Just give me a little bit more time. Those are the decks where this is best. But you could just play this. Like Jason played this in a deck. I think it was his Kenrith deck he played for the Companions episode of our show, where he didn't really have any. Maybe he had some other proliferate cards in his deck, but not many. He just played this quote unquote fairly because he knew that the opportunity would arise that he'd be able to kill someone with it. And he did. So, yeah. Next up, we have things that automatically let Planeswalkers ultimate. So the most famous one is Doubling Season. But there's also the Vorinclex from Kaldheim. And I believe if you fully level up the new Innkeeper's Talent from Bloomborough, that does it too. So Doubling Seasons, because it's the most popular one. It has 2 modes, but the important one is if an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, put twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. So you drop this. Now you play your Planeswalker. Your Planeswalker enters with twice as many loyalty counters, meaning most
Planeswalkers, that's an ultimate.
Yeah,
That's an immediate ultimate.
And there are some Planeswalkers that will just win the game when you do that. So, Jason, you've had a Golgari Planeswalker deck, right? So what are a few of the options that you have for just like Planeswalkers that could win out of nowhere with that?
Vraska is one. Because there's the Vraska that makes the assassins, where when they deal combat damage, that player loses the game. There's the Vraska that makes an opponent's life total 1. Even the Garrick planeswalkers, like the Garrick that like you get an emblem with, like creatures you control get +3/+3 and trample, vigilance, or whatever.
A permanent overrun effect.
That is alone enough to win you the game. I mean, being able to just double the counters on your planeswalkers and ult them right away, like, it's going to require a little bit more of a setup, because typically those planeswalkers cost a lot of mana. Vorinclex costs a lot of mana. Doubling Season costs a lot of mana. So you are paying probably 11, 12 mana into that win con, but if you're paying 12 mana for it, you should be winning the game.
Yeah, Preston, do you think Doubling Season is the best one of these effects, or do you think there's an argument that Innkeeper's Talent or Vorinclex might be better?
No, it's Doubling Season, because you don't have to like put as much mana into it as the other ones. Vorinclex a creature, so it's easier to hit. And it also has the token thing, and you're playing green, so that's not nothing. And some of those planeswalkers also care about tokens and token creatures. So yeah, Doubling Season is insane with planeswalkers.
All right, we have one last card. I think I skipped Jason on the last one. Jason, do you want to take this last card?
So this is Helix Pinnacle. It's 1 green mana for an enchantment with Shroud, and it has an ability where it says pay X, put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle. And then it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, you win the game. So this is not a necessary win out of nowhere card unless you've been able to generate a lot of mana. Like if you can generate infinite mana, say you're playing like a Selvala Heart of the Wilds deck, and you're just using Selvala to make 100 million mana. I mean, then it's a win the game out of nowhere card. But honestly, you could drop this early game, and it's going to be hard for people to get rid of because of the Shroud. And it's just going to sit there, and you can always just dump the extra mana that you aren't using into it. Now, are you going to be guaranteed to win the game with this card? Is it going to be super consistent? No, but it's honestly one of the more fair win cons that are out there, and it's a nice way for green to have a win con that isn't just an overrun effect, because that's honestly how a lot of green win cons are. It's just make my creatures really big and make them do a lot of damage to people. So it's a cool card for that reason too.
Anything that lets you spend the mana that would otherwise go to waste during each rotation is always going to be a fun one. So this is just one of the best things you can throw in. It's only one by itself to play it the first turn, so you can just let it build up slowly over time. People are going to forget about it. I have won a game or two with this because people forgot it was sitting there for a while, and then eventually I have like 20 mana in a turn, so I could just win, and they didn't think about it for a while. So it can be a sneaky little win con, and it's pretty fun.
Notably, also, if you have any way to create infinite mana, then you just get there right away. So then you just have to make it back to your upkeep.
Oh no, someone won with infinite mana.
Oh
Did this happen?
no! Yeah. It is funny trying to win with this fairly, but I agree with Preston's sentiment that like you should have mana sinks in your decks. And I think
100%.
I think people overlook that. Like you will have times where like you're not finding your card draw, you're not finding your engine pieces, and you are just sitting there and you're like, I have lands, I have mana, but I don't have cards in my hand, or the cards that are in my hand are too situational. They don't apply to this given situation.
Well, you could be holding up answers that you don't need during that rotation.
But having things on the battlefield, whether it be activate abilities on your lands, or in this case your Helix Pinnacle, or maybe you have some creatures that have activate abilities, like having things to, if you don't have anything better to do, make sure you're not letting your mana go to waste, because oftentimes whoever spends the most mana or uses their mana more efficiently, I should say, is probably the person who's going to win the game. That's a good place to end this. Let us know in the comments what some of your favorite win cons are, and we will be back next week. Do we decide on what we're doing next week? Oh yeah, we're starting a several part episode tier list for the top 100 commanders according to EDH So we'll knock out, I think, 20 of them, and we'll do 20 at a time or so. So we'll be doing that off and on for the next few months. So we'll be starting that. We'll see you guys later. Bye.